Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from everybody watching. Actually, our wonderful people. Actually, this time we have Matt and we have Reid, two longtime friends for over a decade now. We are very, very honored to have them in here with us during this webcast. And the subject today is about the importance of infrastructures in generative AI, especially for the enterprise. So before I start, let's start with Matt. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself, boss?
Yeah, sure. My name's Matthew Gray. Most of what I do is cloud infrastructure. Lately, it's been around the design of cloud infrastructure specifically for AI platforms. My wife and I, we own and operate a small software consulting firm out of Oxford, Mississippi, named Hatboy Software, and just happy to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matt, for doing this. I appreciate it. Monsieur Reid, go for it, boss.
Hey, Lino, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here as well. My name is Reid Patrick, and I'm an Azure MVP. Have been for 9, hopefully 10 times. We're getting ready to do the renewals, right? Got to fill all that paperwork out. But just like Matt and I work together quite a lot, and we've been designing and building cloud platforms on our own or together for quite a while. I spent the better part of a year, although it sort of feels like dog years, over the last year building, Azure OpenAI infrastructures. I have a lot of experience with Bicep and Terraform and PowerShell and that sort of thing, and we love building things that run, and we love building things that scale, especially with code. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. It's a new world out there, right, Leo?
It is awesome, man. Yes. And I had the pleasure and honor working with both of you on a lot of major enterprise grade projects that require heavy infrastructure with AKS, with ACAs, with security galore. Learned a lot from you guys. Thank you very much. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to actually have this maybe 30-minute conversation. And I'm sure a lot of people would be interesting about the scars that both of you have building infrastructure for generative AI. So let me go ahead and go for it. We'll pick one of you. Let's start with Matt, for instance. My first question for you, Matt: how important is a well-designed infrastructure for an enterprise-grade AI? Should you actually create the entire architecture from the beginning or go with the flow? So let's
Well,
take
so
this.
it's really important to think about your use case, right? So, like, are you designing for a large organization that needs to have that needs to service a large number of users? Let's say a university, for example, right? You need to be able to operate at scale. How do you account for that? Right? There's a number of different factors you need to take into account. In addition to that, what are your use cases? Are you going to be uh, using vectorized index stores for retrieval augmentation patterns, and how are you going to support that? It- you know, so there's a lot of things to consider when you do that. In the sense that you want to make sure that you have your infrastructure designed to minimize latency and still service the volume of traffic uh, specific to your use case.
So one of
Yeah,
the
I can just,
questions probably for
I,
both of you guys.
yep.
Sorry, that I just want to make sure what is for both of you. What is a mistake that even an experienced engineer in infrastructure they design something for Gen AI, and after a couple of months, like, oh, I shouldn't have done it that way.
Make it asynchronous.
Make it asynchronous. Yeah. And I think that, one of the key things that we've seen with solutions that are kind of, baked really quickly by developers. Everyone wants to do AI, want to do it fast. All the companies are saying, yeah, like you can do it so fast and all this sort of thing. But fast and enterprise don't really match up very well, right? And one of the things that we've seen, um, that is important is, and this isn't just AI, this is for anything cloud, anything you're building fast, is the default for the cloud is using your credentials, right? Like I am your login ID, like that's like the only moat, right? It's like the only bit of security, and that's not going to fly in an enterprise, right? You have to think about the network security, the encryption methods, where the data is stored, how it's accessed, and even who can access it, right? one of the things that we've seen a lot with these AI solutions, especially the kind of, chat GPT kind of scenario, right? Where people are asking questions, uploading files, things like that, is all of that litter, right? What are they asking? What did they upload? If a company takes a solution, gives it to all their employees, and the first thing they do is go on their hard drive, find like, a PDF of one of their bills and post it and ask it questions. Okay, well, you've just stored someone's personal information. It's very hard to keep someone from doing that, right? And the same use case if they're doing something for work, those things need to be secured. So, we're really interested not only in who you are, but how the rest of the network is configured. Network security and Azure using like private links and firewalls to investigate and look at that data. And then where is that data stored? Is it encrypted? How can you get to it? Are those storage accounts just hanging out on the internet? Things like that. So really, I think it's that kind of next order thinking to build and drive to that solution. And then the other thing is identities are keys. Right.
Hmm.
I know Matt's actually had a hard day with this already today, but identities and keys, when we're building solutions that specifically like in Azure, and obviously all the other clouds have these capabilities too. You really need to use roles. You need to use RBAC. The system, like where it's grabbing information from, how like if you have an API and it needs to go access data in a storage account, how is it doing that? Is it just using a key? Because if it's, you can't say I want a key for just one like API, right? If you have a key, you have a key, and if someone steals that key, if they have network access to it, back to the private networking piece, they can get access to anything. Every
Yep.
single question, every single user ID, every single doc that's been updated or uploaded, that sort of thing. So I think that all of the standard things apply past just using the IAM roles. So yeah, I mean, it's just like any other enterprise solution,
Yeah.
right? You can build something in dev or build something in POC quick, but the devil is always going to be in the details, and that's where it really gets difficult. Me and Matt have spent, I don't even know how
Hours
many
upon
days and months and
hours.
years talking to people about network security groups and firewalls and private links and things like that to keep these solutions safe.
And I
So
get to monitor that and see what you guys do every day. Look at all the white hair. By the way, Reid is 23, folks. I just want to let you know.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
like
Now I'm going to actually ask you a second question. Let's take this one for you, Reid. And
okay,
this one is pretty much close to our hearts, you and I, because we do a lot of training courses. I
yep.
have a one on Terraform. But the question really is, how should company choose between Bicep and Terraform, especially
Mm,
if they are deploying only on Azure? I know the
mm,
answer to that, but I would like you to actually share that for the rest of the world, how to make that decision. And these are not the only two products. There's like 5 or 6 other products out there that will help
yeah.
you do this. But these, especially for the Azure people, they always want to ask, is it Terraform that I should go with or
Yeah.
Bicep, and why?
Yeah, the typical answer to something like this would be, well, use Terraform because you can use that in other places, right? You can use it in GCP, you can use it with VMware, you can use it with you can order a Domino's pizza with it. You know what I mean?
That's the only reason I use it, actually, just because different.
Exactly, right? You need a loop in there for multiple cheese toppings or whatever. Um, I think that this to me is I'll look at it in a different way and make it pretty simple. I'm interested to hear what Matt's take on this is too. But my point of view is that if you have existing code base and you have people that know how to write Terraform, that's an if then else. Use Terraform. You might as well, right? But one layer higher than that would be if you're really only going to fire and forget once, Bicep is fine, right? Like
Hmm.
that's my point of view on it. If you, I frankly think Terraform is easier than Bicep. I mean, that's just my opinion, but maybe it's because I've used Terraform a lot more. But if you're going to manage that, and we were just talking about enterprise solutions, if you're going to manage that infrastructure and you want to know what it's doing and know its state and update it, that's when I would use Terraform because it's not just a fire and forget motion, right? Of course, you can write Terraform and only use it once. I mean, you can. But for me, Bicep is more like I want to start from a known configuration. And then after that, is probably just going to either sit there, or I'll make a few tweaks in the portal, maybe use a CLI, something like that. But for me, if you're going to manage that, Terraform would be the way I would do it. And I would also go further to say that, something like Terraform really shines when we can write a base set of configurations and then just basically use some variables to have multiple environments. Terraform has something great called workspaces, which is extremely powerful, right? So that's kind of my take on it, just a quick hot take. I'd be interested to hear what Matt has to say about it.
Well, I mean, to your point, I agree 100%. If it were up to me on a project, greenfield, brownfield, otherwise, right, Terraform, just hands down. But that's where a lot of my expertise lies in terms of infrastructure as code. Now, Bicep, perfectly fine. And if you're more familiar with Bicep, great. To me, it's just another level of abstraction away from ARM templates. And there's a lot of people who are intimately familiar with ARM templates, and to that credit, it maps very well one-to-one between Bicep and ARM templates. And if that's what you're comfortable with, by all means use that. But Terraform does provide a lot of additional benefits that you don't intrinsically get using Bicep or ARM. So,
One thing I would add, actually, because something you just said made me think about something, is that, the Terraform providers always lag. They do, right? And the one thing with, OpenAI, it's moving, right? Like, it was like no one ever heard of DeepSeek. Then it disrupted the entire internet. And then, 2 weeks later or something like that,
it's
we
available
see
as a new deployment on OpenAI. Yeah.
available as a new deployment. I honestly don't know if you could use Terraform to like put DeepSeek out, right? I actually don't know. I haven't tried to do it, but my thought process is that, when something goes into the ARM API, meaning that you can write an ARM template for it, it's immediately available to you in Bicep, right? The linter might not be up to date in code, right? It might be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're going to get the benefit of that. So if you're really pushing the edge of the envelope with things, that might be a reason to stick with Bicep, because it's just going to be fast. You're not going to have that lag. And we've definitely seen that in the past where we write a big giant, we have a giant Terraform code base, and then all of a sudden we're doing, REST calls in the Terraform code to put something into Azure, right? Which seems weird. But or I mean, I guess if you're so inclined and you think Go is an awesome language, you can go update the Azure Terraform provider. Although, they probably won't approve your PRs. You know what I mean? OpenTofu, I think that they approve the PRs faster. At least that's what I've seen. So.
I'm going to give you my 2 cents on that, guys. Yeah. I mean, you guys are the gods when it comes to infrastructure, but I'm like you. I'm certified on Terraform. I have a very well-received course on Terraform on udemy.com. But the main thing is I see Bicep inching, just for me, especially for Azure, above Terraform in one thing. I'm used to Terraform always when I do a plan and then I apply. If the plan succeeds, there is a big chance that the apply will not succeed because I'm shooting from the outside. With Bicep, I am shooting from the inside. The Bicep is going directly, and if it succeeds, it will succeed. But Terraform, even if the plan succeed, I'm still shooting from the outside. It will not go through all the validation on the inside of your resources if you have policies, so that's one thing that I like. If you're only Azure, if you're doing any other clouds beside Azure, it's a Terraform 100%. Does that make sense?
It does. The inverse of that, though, Lino, is sometimes I really wish I knew what Bicep was going to do. Like, please just tell me what you're going to do. Whereas Terraform at least tries. Like, it's not always right, by the way. You know what I mean? Like, I see that too, but. Man, sometimes I wish these AZD projects that me and Matt work with Bicep.
For us AI geeks, we want Bicep to give us citations.
Yes.
Let us know why it did it and how it did it. That's pretty cool. All right, let me ask you. We'll go back to Matt, and I have a third question for you, boss. How does security depend on infrastructure plans for generative AI projects? I know Reid actually started with this one, but I want to go a little bit deeper. I mean, I want to talk about RBAC and PBAC for policies, and how is the infrastructure for security is extremely important for the enterprise.
Well, so this is a big one because, just naively using OpenAI or any other like generative AI platform for that matter, right? Um, you're blindly submitting prompts, right? And that's fine if you're the only user using a generative AI service, right? But if you don't plan for security, if you don't plan for like granular control of that data and the data that's generated from it and where it goes and who has access to it, that's a large potential threat vector. It could be depending on what's shared, depending on your users and what they're doing with your generative AI platform. What the purpose is. That could be a pretty significant data breach, right? And so if you don't plan appropriately, not just the infrastructure, but also like the software behind it and how it manages and handles this data and limits access to the prompt information, the response information, any sort of external data source that it might use in part of its analysis, then you're opening up yourself to a pretty 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 dangerous situation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take what Matt just said and simplify it a little bit. So let's say you've got a set of file shares, old school file shares at a company, right? Each share is like assigned to a group. You add a person to the group, they can see all the files, right? Typically, this is probably done, I mean, this is done a million times a day all over the world, right? Um, let's say it's a hospital, you've got nurses, they can get to a file share where they get like templates or Word documents or something that they use, right? Or maybe there's more information in there. Maybe there's important information like private healthcare information, things like that. Only those people are supposed to see whatever. Well, the same sort of thing can happen in an AI scenario where you're vectorizing like all those files and you're letting people go and search for it. You need some way to be able to figure out like who's supposed to be able to see what. Okay. And without having policies and then RBAC on those things, or having agents that are configured with that RBAC on it. Like we're not even thinking like this. Like Matt's saying, we're so used to just like, oh, I go ask Chat GPT some question or something. That's not what we're doing. You're talking about like domain specific data. It's proprietary data, right? you know um, Imagine an employee that's not supposed to have access to the financial data of a company that can just go and ask questions, get information they're not supposed to have, and then they go and they buy or sell stock based on it. Well, that's insider trading. Okay. And you've just allowed that to happen, and that's scary. There could be a person should have been very data siloed, and you could open up the entire barn, right? So I think that, to Matt's point, it's about planning, but also having, software setups that use that, having a security model, having a risk model, and then how do you audit it? That sort of thing. So again, we're talking more about these, enterprise-based scenarios where things that we feel like we solved with NFS, like in 1995, all of a sudden it's a billion times worse, because instead of just being able to see, oh, I can see all these files, I can double click and open them and read them. Now it's just like I can ask any question in the whole world, you know. And especially if all your data is in SharePoint or something like that, and you're vectorizing all that stuff. I mean, wow, So it's a really big deal. It's a
Yeah,
big deal.
it is a very big deal. I mean, the three of us deal with that on a daily basis, especially for financial industry companies and for healthcare and so on, where PII is very information intensive and it's compliance galore.
Yep.
And I see two different things with the security that always comes up. Some people have thousands of documents in SharePoint, and they would like the index that's going to be created on this data source to follow the same permissions that were given to the SharePoint, which is a completely different thing. The vector store is different than the data source itself.
Yes.
They want to make sure, like, also, if you're actually going to be vectorizing a SQL Server database, for instance, if there's a salary column and you don't have access to the database, the vectorized version should not give you access to the salary of the CEO as well.
Yes.
So there is a lot of infrastructure that has to be put in there, whether it's column level security, row level security, masking. We use Microsoft Presidio for doing PII and all that stuff, but security is a huge thing, and every single financial company or or a healthcare company will always have to quiz you on that. Nobody wants to be in the news, right? So
Yeah.
that is the main thing that is going on right now. Absolutely.
That's interesting about a remediation too. If you think
Mhm.
about it, where you say to yourself, you've got a data set, you got a SharePoint list, or you got, a database, and you say, okay, well, this is going to be made available where people can ask it. Maybe we need to go put some real level security in. Like maybe you haven't done that before because there was a very limited set of users. It wasn't that important, but now you're trying to make that data more available, but only the parts they're supposed to see. You almost have to do some remediation before you end up in that other store even. So that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's why the architecture, not only for the infrastructure, also the architecture of the indexes. Are you going to create multiple indexes and give different people different permission? Or are you going to
Right.
create one index and then split it up who can get to what in the index? There are a lot of different ways to do this, but you have to think about it. It's not
Yeah.
out of the box.
You're making me think. Yeah, I'm scared.
Awesome. I have one more question for both of you guys. I'm going to go back to Reid on this one. And this one is, how does data storage and vectorization depend on solid infrastructure design for enterprise success? It's almost a continuation of what we were just talking about. I want to
Absolutely.
make
Yeah.
sure that the difference between the data storage, which is the data source, and the vectorization, they are not the same thing when it comes to
Yeah.
infrastructure. Go for it.
Well, I'll kind of lean back a little bit on what we were talking about before. I mean, the minimums that we're starting with are, who has access, which we just kind of covered, but then how do you gain access, right? Um, and how is that access limited? Because, to me, it those basics are the most important things before we even get into anything fancy, right? Storage accounts, things like that, or even like you're saying, like like Azure AI search and things like that, like places where indexes are. You leverage. First of all, my advice is leverage everything that Microsoft gives you in Azure, right? Okay. Don't use the easy part, use the hard part, because the hard part is designed for the security. And don't just think about, it's so funny because to this day we always think about users access and admins access, but that's not as important. Okay. Like if I have an AKS cluster and that AKS cluster has, if I just get blanket access to the system identity for that thing, to like that vector store, well, I could do a deployment with something simple that I'm using to get that data in and then exfiltrate it out.
Mhm.
Right. So, being very fine grained with security, not allowing the easy access. Don't leave your door unlocked, or don't leave your key, under a stone out front. I mean, these very basic things. Um, those examples and thinking that way, I think, are very important. To me, I'm an Azure networking MVP, so I always think networking first, right? you know, and really, I mean, back to the basics, OSI layer, right? How do you get to it? How do you access it? How is it encrypted? How do the apps get access it? But then reapplying all of those things and thought processes from an architecture perspective across not just the users, but anything that's going to access that system, right? So to me, that's probably the best answer that I can think of straight away. What do you think, Matt?
You're you basically took the words right out of my mouth. If you just give blanket access to a resource, all someone needs to do is hijack that resource, right?
Yeah.
Um, all it takes is one malicious actor within an organization to deploy to deploy a microservice to your AKS cluster, to maybe
Yeah.
deploy a container to one of your app services that has access to all of your critical information, right? Once they've got that, it's game over, right? So do what you can to limit the access. Use least privilege, not just on your users, but on your resources. Limit as much as you can the access that the resources have to other resources within the cloud.
Matt, I just want to tag on to something you said there, because when you said least privilege, you and I have spent a ton of time where we're looking at like APIs gaining access to things and,
Hmm.
this sort of thing. Um, you and I and every other person on the planet, we're human beings, which means that we're lazy. Okay.
Mhm.
It is so easy to be like, I'm using managed identities, I'm assigning them roles to get access. And you go and look at the roles and they all say contributor. Because the first thing you think to yourself, okay, well, let me make it have access, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's the easy one, contributor. But there are so many built-in roles to Azure, right? For example, and they're very fine grained. So, you can be lazy and give, what's the word? I don't know what the term would be, like, give too many rights, like
Right.
basically give it more than it needs instead of the inverse, which is only give it the minimum it can need.
To
You can
do
be
its
really
job.
lazy. You can be really lazy and give it everything, but then what's the point? I mean, you might as well just use the key or something, right? Like
You're
maybe
leaving the
something.
door wide open, right?
Yeah,
And so, like, and just, one thing I'm gonna add to that, just a blanket statement, if you're if you're using AKS clusters, right, and you're not using workload identity, you're doing it wrong,
yeah,
period.
yep, exactly. And don't
This
leave
is
that API.
awesome.
Don't leave
I
that
had so
API
much
sitting
fun
on the
with
internet either. Use private links. Come on, it's
Oh,
not that.
absolutely. Private network everything.
that. That was everything. Absolutely. Guys, it has been a
One-
wonderful half an hour.
I know it goes fast, doesn't it?
It goes so fast, but it's always a privilege for me to listen to you guys talk geeky, which is awesome. Thank you so much. We have to do this again very soon, okay? We'll pick
Absolutely.
another topic, and I'm sure a lot of people would enjoy hearing all the scars that we all go through enterprise grade applications and infrastructure. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful one, and have a great weekend. And I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lino. See you later.
Thanks, Lino. Take it
Bye,
easy.
Matt. Bye.
Bye, Reid.